My name is Jim Wallace. I work cold case investigations in Los Angeles County. And you might be thinking, that's a weird kind of a person to speak at a marriage conference, right? Yeah, but most of my cold cases are husbands who killed their wives. That's why this fits perfectly at a marriage conference, okay? Now, I will tell you that I've been working these cases for a number of years, and they teach you something that I want to share with you that I think will be helpful to you, or I wouldn't bother to come at all. This is, for me, it was 11 hours to get here yesterday. I've worked cold cases are just murders that go unsolved because there's no statute of limitations on a murder. Those stay open. And so I've got cases that go back 35 years. And if you like Dateline, you've probably seen some of my cases because I've been on Dateline, I think, more than anybody else in the country because these are unusual, unsolved cases. But they teach you something about human nature. And I'll tell you, when I first started working cases, I was not a Christian. I wasn't raised in a Christian setting. I don't have a Christian family growing up. I was 35 before I even started to examine Christianity to see if it was true. My dad just now is starting to become softer to the idea that God might exist after 22 years of beating him with a stick, okay? Now, my son is doing the same job that I was doing for years before me. He has the same name because we're not creative people. We just use the same name over and over and again. I just wrote a book, and George Foreman is one of the endorsers on the book. Do you guys know who George Foreman is? So George Foreman is really a great guy, but he's got kids, 6 boys. You know what their names are, right? George Foreman, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're kind of the George Foreman of law enforcement. As a matter of fact, I gave my uniforms to my son because that name tag right there, that says Jim Wallace on it. Well, mine says Jim Wallace on it. So at the last day I worked, I told my sergeant, I'm going to work a day in patrol with my son. I'm just going to put a uniform back on, and at the end of the shift, I gave him my uniforms. Because my dad did that for me before me. His name is, guess what? Jim Wallace. For 58 years, there has been a Jim Wallace at our agency. If you call and, hey, is Jim Wallace there? There's somebody there to answer the phone, okay? It's just the way it works. Now, you might be kind of wondering how it is I'm even interested in a marriage conference, but it strikes me that you're about to learn stuff about family and marriage and life at this conference that we're going to argue is true because we find it in the Bible. I don't care who it is you're doing counseling with, if you're doing biblical counseling or you're doing counseling in the church, you are probably taking principles out of the Bible to guide you in that counseling. But ask yourself a question, why do we do that? Why is it that we use that text to tell us anything about life and about marriage? If you're saying, well, we use this because we've used it for years and years and years, and guess what? It works. We see marriages restored. We see all kinds of principles adopted that change people's lives. Is that why we're using our Bibles to teach us something about this? If that's the case, there's a lot of other books that are probably equally useful. They work. I could teach principles out of the Book of Mormon. I could teach principles probably out of Buddhism. I can teach principles out of Baha'i. I can teach principles out of Islam. Why are we using, is that why we're just adopting this because it happens to work? Is that what we're doing? Did Mickey just come up here and have an entire talk grounded on biblical principles? Yeah, they're not really true, but they work. Is that what we're doing? Or are we saying, no, this is something different because it's not just that it works, it happens to be true. Now, I needed to know if that was the case because I'm not interested in what works. I'm only interested in what's true. And I needed to know. Now, I will tell you that there are people in this room right now who go to church regularly. You know these folks if you aren't one of them. They don't even believe it's true. Their spouse does. That was me. I'll go to church with Susie if she wants to go. That was 22 years ago. I was happy to go if she wanted to go. We were together 18 years before either one of us became a Christian. But if she wanted to go to church, I'll go. I think it's crazy. But if you want to go, my dad's the same way even now. He'll go to church. Doesn't think it's true. Hey, but it's good for you. It works for you. You're raising great kids. It's working for you raising your kids. It's got some value. Go ahead, go to church. Not true, though. Really? I will tell you, just a few years ago, I was asked to do a 6-minute scene in a movie called God's Not Dead 2, making a case for why this is true. Now, I'm going to ask you, though, if you had 6 minutes to make a case for why this is true, would you be able to do it? We just did a session with high schoolers and all the way down to 6-year-olds, and I was like, really? So we're going to have 6-year-olds to 17. That's a bit of a gap in years there, 11 years, right? So I'm thinking to myself, you know what? The kids who really need to know if it's true are usually in high school. We're just going to focus on high schoolers. All you 6-year-olds, get ready. You're all just got jumped in. You're in high school, or you want to go high school right now. I want to help you know if this is true, because there are people who are here right now because your spouse drags you to something like this about once every 2 to 5 years. So here you are, whatever, let's just get through it, okay? Can we come in after the songs are done? Can we do that at least? I want to be there in time for Chick-fil-A, but after the songs are done? That was me. I want to start this by showing you something. In our city, we often get called out to what are called dead body reports. Those are simply people who have passed away, but we don't know why, and they might be suspicious, so they'll assign a detective. At least the first 2 people will be patrol officers. They'll get called out to the scene. We got called out to a scene a number of years ago of a woman who was a very committed drug addict, and she was found dead by her roommate in her bedroom, lying in her bed. This was her nightstand. Can you see that? Let me give it to you a little closer. So she's got her heroin needles here. She cooks on the bottom of that can, uses that water. This is another heroin needle here. She's got a heroin needle here. Now, if you shoot heroin all the time, you're not going to be good for much. So she would smoke rock cocaine simultaneously to kind of balance herself. But if you do rock cocaine and heroin at the level that she's doing for very long, bad things will happen. So when our officers got there and she's dead in her bed, and this is her nightstand, what do you think they think? Overdose. So they think, okay, let's call the coroner. They didn't call me, they called the coroner. Because it's not a murder investigation, it's just an overdose. So they call the coroner's investigator, they send out 2 investigators. They take about an hour and a half to get there, hour and 15 minutes, because it's Los Angeles County. A lot of dead bodies. So we get out there finally, and then the first investigator walks up to her. She has been lying in bed with the blankets up around her chest, pulls down the blankets, and she's been stabbed to death. This is not an overdose, it was a murder. How do they miss that? Well, they missed it because they came in the room thinking they knew the answer before they even bothered to do an investigation. And if you think you know the answer before you even start, good chance you won't even pull down the blanket. We need to know if this is true, but you got to start by keeping an open mind, because what we're trying to do here is to figure out what is the most reasonable inference from evidence. By the way, it's not what's possible. The standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt, because you'd never convict anybody of that, because that's a crazy high doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's lower. Anything and everything is possible. Not everything is reasonable. We're looking for reasonable. What's the reasonable explanation? Well, how do we even determine what's reasonable to begin with? That's what I'm going to show you this morning, all right? Now, I'm going to have to show you a dead body in order for us to do this. So you ready? Dead guy laying face down. Here he is. He looks suspiciously like my son, Jimmy. Back when he worked at Trader Joe's. Do you have a Trader Joe's anywhere around here? It's a market in Los Angeles County. He worked at that market for about 5 years before he became a police officer. Now, this is not necessarily a crime scene. It's a death scene. But there are 4 ways to die. Not all of them are criminal. How do we determine what happened here? We make a list. And we compare the evidence to the explanations for the evidence. So far, all we have in terms of evidence is a dead guy laying face down. Would you agree? And how do we explain dead guys laying face down? There are 4 ways. He might have died by some natural cause. He might have died by way of some accident. He might have committed suicide. Or he might have been murdered. Now, right now, given what I have, can I cross out any of these explanations as unreasonable? All of them are possible, but are they reasonable? What can I cross out? Raise your hand if you think you know. Or just shout it out. What can I cross out? Suicide? Well, if he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like that, wouldn't he? Heck, if he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like that. If I intentionally murdered him by making him take too many pills, he would look like that. If he had a heart attack, he would look like that. Actually, right now, I can't cross out anything. So let's change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down, but now he's in a pool of his own blood-centered torso? Would that make a difference? I think it would. Let's add that to our list. Now, what can I cross out? Yeah, I can't think of a natural place, center torso, that you could bleed out. He's not bleeding out from his head. It's around his center torso. Is it possible? Sure. But it's not reasonable. I can cross that out. Is there anything else you can cross out? Kind of need to roll him over first, right? And see what the injury is and see if I can cross out anything else. Okay, so let's go ahead and change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood and he has a big honking knife sticking out of his back? Would that change things? I think it would. Let's add that to our list. Can I cross out anything? It's possible that he somehow backed into that knife in some weird way. I don't know. I don't think it's an accidental. Now, you might say, I don't think it's a suicide either, but I'll tell you what, most of the people, we go out into suicides all the time. And when we go to suicides, many of them are high when they commit suicide. You see all kinds of crazy suicides. And I can actually do that. So I'm going to leave suicide in the mix for now. But what if, instead of having that, I had multiple stab wounds in his upper back? Would that change things? I think it would. So now I got multiple stab wounds. Unless he's incredibly flexible and determined and has a high tolerance for pain, I'm guessing that's probably not a suicide, right? But if I had any question, what if I also, in addition to all that, had bloody footprints leading out of the room? I'm thinking, hey, it's really hard to stab yourself multiple times in your own back and walk out of the room in your own blood. That's a homicide. That's a reasonable inference. Now, by the way, Jimmy is still alive, just so you know, okay? I went to UCLA, he went to UCLA, we are Bruins, okay? My son David went to USC, he's a communist, okay, just so you know. All right, this is a process that is known as abductive reasoning. I've written about this and drawn it in the book Cold Case Christianity. It's just a process of reasoning. It's also called inferring to the most reasonable explanation, okay? It's called abductive reasoning. This is what we do at every crime scene. I started to wonder as I was examining the scriptures for the first time and not quite sure what to make of them. Could I use abductive reasoning to determine if Christianity was true? Could I take this approach and turn it to the empty tomb? Because there are lots of facts, of evidences I would have to list, and then ways to explain those. So this is what I did. I just said, okay, this is the most important claim in all of Christianity. Paul tells us if the resurrection is not true, get over it. You got no hope at all because there's no resurrection. And we have been false witnesses. We've been lying to you. Paul makes some amazing claims. You guys memorize your scriptures? Susie and I do this every night. We try to memorize scripture. This is the most important first piece of scripture you should ever memorize. It's 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8. It is one of the earliest church creeds. We can trace it back to within 3 years of the resurrection. Paul says, "For I declared to you what I also received." Think about that. What I also received. That Jesus Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised again on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brethren at one time, most of whom are with us, still with us, some of whom have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. That's what Paul says here. Really? Okay. I'll tell you what I would have said as an atheist. I'll give you 4 things as an atheist that I said were evidence I would have accepted about the empty tomb. Here they are. I would have said, okay, I will give you, there's a guy named Jesus lived. I'm not a Jesus myther. I believe that Jesus lived. And I believe he died on a cross and was buried. So what? That could be true and Christianity could still be false. I could explain that some other way. Lots of people die on crosses even today. Did you know that? They're being crucified right now. This does not make Christianity true. So some guy died on a cross and was buried. Also, I would tell you, I believe that the tomb was empty because let's face it, if you wanted to end Christianity pretty quickly, just get the body of Jesus and drag it around town, it's game over. They couldn't do that. There was nobody to drag around town. They were stuck with an empty tomb. That's why we have this nonsense to begin with. But I'll tell you, this could be true and that could be true, and Christianity could still be false. Because I can explain the empty tomb in a number of different ways. That body could have been stolen out of that tomb. 3, I would have said that they said they saw a risen Christ. So what? People say all kinds of stupid things that aren't true. Really? You know how many? Every faith system is built on some claim that you don't think is true. This isn't true either. Oh yeah, and they were willing to die. So what? People are flying planes into buildings, what is a lie. These 4 things could be true, and this is all I would have given you as an atheist. This is it. This is as far as I would go with you. I would have said as an atheist, I agree to those 4 things, yet I do not believe Christianity is true. But you got to explain it then. Let me explain it. I think there are actually 7 ways to explain those 4 pieces of evidence. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them with you today. I'm just going to go through a couple with you. The first 6 explanations are the explanations that atheists give, who do not believe Christianity is true. They've got 6 different ways of explaining this evidence. The 7th is your explanation as a Christian. I know some of you are trying to take pictures of this. You don't need to. I'm going to send you this video. I'm going to send you this video in high def. You'll have it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to show you how to get it when it's over, okay? For free. I'm just going to send it to you, okay? So don't worry. All right. Let's just go through a couple of them real quick. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe Jesus isn't really dead on the cross, right? I mean, after all, if you look at the Gospels, the Gospel of John, for example, it says that he was executed alongside 2 other criminals. When they came to get the bodies, guess what? The 2 guys that Jesus was executed with, they weren't dead. So why is he the only one who's dead? By the way, they made sure the other 2 were dead by doing what? Breaking their legs. They didn't break the legs of Jesus to make sure he was dead. If he is not dead, this is not a resurrection. He just passes out and it's a simple resuscitation. That's very different than a resurrection. If he's not dead, he can get off that cross at some point and be alive again because he was never dead to begin with. But there's a piece of hidden science right here. Do you see it? And if you just didn't look at that, you might miss it. By the way, when John first wrote this, he didn't even understand that. How is it that when they stab him with a spear, they see a separation of blood and water come out of his chest? How does that happen? I can see blood coming out, but what's the water thing about? And by the way, all the earliest church believers, including the church fathers, did not think that was real water. So I don't care who you read, if it's the first 500 years, they will all say that the water is something other than water. It's a symbol of baptism. It's a symbol of the Holy Spirit. It's a symbol of a new life. It's a symbol. It can't be real water. And if you read Origen, Tertullian, or Jerome, all of these folks will say it's not water. Why are they saying that? Because they can't understand how water could come. They don't understand the science of death. Now, some of you in this room, you actually handle dead people. That's what you do for a living, right? I get it. Some of you do, some of you don't. But I will tell you that there's a science to death. I'm going to teach it to you. First of all, when you see someone is badly beaten, maybe they die in front of you or they get in a car accident and I show up before they die, I will see them go into what's called circulatory shock. They'll start to become catatonic as they try to reserve resources for the critical functioning of the heart. If the heart fails and they go into cardiac arrest, they're going to suffer one of 2 forms of effusion. Either pericardial effusion, and that's where water collects around your heart. But if I was to stab that, you would not see a separation of blood and water because it's really a much thinner membrane, and the heart is a very rich source of blood. It's going to look like blood. Unless you happen to die in just the right position and you suffer the other type of effusion, which is called pleural effusion. Now, water is going to collect in your lungs. If you stab your chest cavity, if you happen to be in an upright position, you will see a separation of water coming out of your body. But that means you've already suffered cardiac arrest. As it turns out, that blood and water separated like that is a hidden piece of science that demonstrates that Jesus is already dead. And by the way, do you really think people in the first century would not know if somebody is dead? Yeah, I get it. We don't touch dead people very much. right? If your grandma dies, you're not going to go over there and start throw over your shoulder and take her down to the mortuary. No, you're going to call a mortician, right? And the mortuary is going to come and pick her up. You don't have to touch dead people. In the first century, there were no coroners. There were no mortuary workers. You buried your own. The first century believers knew what death looked like. I'm going to teach you what it looks like. Let's go down to Los Angeles coroner's office. This is in North Mission Road in Los Angeles. It's a beautiful old building. You walk up here, you go through this door, make a right-hand turn behind this window. That is the Los Angeles County Coroner's gift shop. Yes, they have a gift shop. It is. You can go online if you want to. Just type it in. It's called Skeletons in the Closet. And you can buy T-shirts like this one that says, "Our bodies of work speak for themselves." Or you can buy a mouse pad that says, "We're dying for your business." Yes, this is actually at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. Now, next door, there's a white building. And in that white building on the basement, there is a series of examination rooms. Now, these examination rooms are really nothing like this. I wish they were like this. Must be what they look like before they ever used them. But the minute they start using these things, they look nasty. There's a reason why you have a metal grate right here and why these are metal with grooves. So you can wash everything off into that grate because these are constantly covered in blood. And when I started in 1988, those tables were wood. Yeah, wood turns into a sponge pretty quickly. And this room smells like death. I have one suit that I wear just for autopsies. See, if you're working in Los Angeles County as a homicide detective, every homicide that you're assigned to, you have to be present for the autopsy. Because I'm going to have to testify for the coroner. That coroner's not coming in for the prelim. I'm going to testify for the coroner at the prelim, right? So I have to be there to see what he does so I can testify to it. So I have to go to coroner. I do a lot of autopsies. My daughter, who's in the military police in the Marine Corps, just attended her first autopsy. So I told her how to get through it, right? You don't breathe out of your nose, you breathe out of your mouth because you won't smell it as bad. It's ridiculous, house of horrors. On the back wall behind this clipboard right there, there's a sign that says, "No eating in the examination room." Like people are going to eat a burger in there, right? Give me a break. But there are things you learn when you go to autopsies. You learn the mortis triad. I want to teach you what happens when you die. 3 inconvenient things happen once your heart stops beating. The first thing that happens is you start to cool down. I don't know if you thought about this or not, but we judge time of death often by the cooling of your body. And if you don't think that your skin cools first, you're wrong. It cools first. That means that when you touch someone like Jesus, you will have a tactile difference between a living Jesus and a dead Jesus. Everyone in the first century knew that. That is called algor mortis. Also, when you die, you start to get stiff. This is called a rigor mortis. If you die in an upright position, by the time I go to Pilate and ask Pilate for your body, as Joseph of Arimathea did, and Pilate said, nay, I'm going to send out people to make sure he's dead. Then he does that. Then he comes back. He says, okay, you can have the body. He goes out. It says in Mark that he bought linens. Then he took those linens to the grave. By that time, if I take the body off the cross, your arms will be stiff in an upright position. They're not just going to flop back down to your sides. That is called rigor mortis. Finally, what's going to happen is this is the biggest giveaway, is if I come to your house and you died on your back, once your heart stops pushing blood, gravity starts to draw your blood. So if you die on your back and I get there and roll you over, your back is going to be purple because it's like a bruise. All the blood is drawn to your skin. If you die in an upright position on a cross, your feet will turn purple and swell because the blood is just being drawn by gravity. Make sense? That is called livor mortis. If you really think that in the first century, after he's got water coming out of his chest, that these people would have missed these 3, hey, it's possible. I just don't think it's reasonable, and that's why I crossed it out. Maybe they're just lying. A lot of you actually like conspiracy theories, right? You like to watch movies that involve conspiracy theories. You like that stuff, right? I know you do. It's like a guilty little pleasure, right? You like that stuff. I know you do. Raise your hand right now if you like any kind of movie or story that involves a conspiracy theory. Raise your hand. Good. Keep them up. Put up both hands. Just put both hands up. Now, I want you to sway like this back and forth. Seriously, just this ring. Now, everyone look at these guys doing this, okay? These are stupid people. Seriously? You like conspiracy? You think everything's a conspiracy? If you think you know of a successful conspiracy theory, it wasn't successful. If it's successful, you don't know anything about it. It's hard to pull off a conspiracy. It turns out you need 5 things in place before you can pull off a conspiracy. I'm going to teach you how to do it. Do we have any siblings in the room with their parents? You have it back there. You guys are all brothers and sisters, right? Raise your hand, please. All the brothers and sisters. How many do you have? How many are here right now? 6 are here. Excellent. I'm going to teach you how to form a conspiracy and lie to your parents. Where are your parents? Your dad's in the back right there. Raise your hand, Dad. Raise it real high. We're going to teach these 6 adults, really, how to lie to their father. I wish I could have had you when you were like 10. I could have taught you this earlier. Go, here we go. Here's how to lie to your dad. Your mom's here too. Where's your mom? There she is. Okay, good. So we're going to teach you how to lie to both those people. The first thing you need is the smallest conspiracy possible. You need the least number of co-conspirators. It's easier for 2 people to lie to dad than it is for 6. So the first thing I'm going to say is just 2 of you do this. You got a much better chance of getting away with it, okay? The second thing you want in place is the shortest amount of time to hold the conspiracy. Shorter, it's easier to tell a lie and keep a secret for a day than it is for a year. So, if you guys pair up and lie to your parents, no problem. As soon as you tell the lie, one of you has to kill the other, okay? Because then it's short-lived. Now there's no conspiracy. That person's dead. It's just me. Got it? Now, if you're not willing to kill your sibling, there's a third way. Here it is. You need excellent communication between you and your sibling. Because what's going to happen is your mom or dad are going to jam you up and go, hey, what's the deal with this? And you're going to offer some story. Well, then they're going to jam up your sibling and say, what's the deal with this? That sibling better be able to tell them exactly what you just told them, to every detail. That's why the first thing we do with 2 suspects is what? Separate them. And I'm going to get in the weeds on this. I'm not going to stop at the surface. I'm going to get in the weeds where I know you haven't pre-planned. Excellent communication, though, will allow you to overcome my questioning. Make sense? Also, you've got strong familial relationships. I know there are 6 of you, okay? I have 6 siblings, 3 brothers, 3 sisters. I'll be honest, I like 2 of them, okay? The other 4, whatever. I mean, they're okay. They're not great. I know you're sitting here right now, I don't want to say it, but you've got 1 or 2 you would be willing to do a conspiracy with. The other 4, you're like, not. Don't do the conspiracy with the sibling. Do the conspiracy with the one you actually like. That's got a better chance of surviving, right? Last thing, try to avoid pressure. If you can just avoid having your parents ask you any questions about this, there's a good chance you're going to get away with it. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because if you're trying to tell me that the whole Christian story about the resurrection is just a conspiracy on the part of the disciples, really? They have to have these 5 things. Or it's not reasonable. Now, look, how many people are we starting off with? It's not just, James and John and Peter. And it's not just the 12. In Acts 1, it says there are 120 people in the upper room. They're looking for a replacement for Judas. And they pick a guy, and by the way, what's the qualification? Eyewitness. Has to be an eyewitness, just like the other ones. Has to be somebody who knew Jesus from the baptism to the resurrection. They pick Matthias. How many people are up there who are saying this happened? Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, 500 of the brethren. How many people are we talking about here? 500 plus? Okay, that number is just too large. Let's just play a little game of Clue together. I mean, old school Clue, when the board used to look like this, right? Okay, we're going to change it and make it the area around where the disciples did their ministry. And we're going to make the game pieces the disciples. I will tell you already, there are too many of these guys. If you're just telling me that there's a world conspiracy that changed the calendar and started us thinking about things in terms of AD and BC, or if you want to say BCE and CE, regardless, we still have the same event that apparently changed your calendar. Really? And is it based on the lie of just 15? No, 500 plus, I'm already out. I'll be honest. Now, how long do they have to hold it? That's another issue. Is it 6 minutes or 6 hours or 6 days or 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years? No, it's 6 decades. You want me to believe that these 500 plus people kept this lie alive for 6 decades? It's possible. Okay, well, how about this? Did these folks have a way to communicate with each other? They weren't in this holy huddle right here, okay? They're all over the game board. So, and you got Thomas over here in India, has no idea what's happening to Matthew in Africa, who has no idea what's happening. You don't think, for example, over here they're beating the dog snot out of, I was that close to messing that up. I was 35, okay, before I became a Christian. All right. So you don't think that this guy right here is not getting beat up, and they're snapping his fingers off and going, dude, tell us, Matthew's already confessed to this. How would he know if Matthew confessed this? He can't Snapchat him. How is he going to know? Seriously. They're not telling this guy's he's getting tortured to death, and they're telling him, hey, listen, Paul's already drinking margaritas. Get over it. It's over. Just give it up. No communication. And do you think they're under any pressure? You've played this game. There's all kinds of pressure in Clue, right? You got all these weapons. You ever watch 24 with Jack Bauer? The old 24? Hey, I'll tell you, the old 24, Jack Bauer would do whatever it took to get the confession. He'd snap your fingers off if he needed to. That's what was happening to these people. They were being tortured. There's a long history of the death and martyrdom of the 12. I don't know. Now, are there some brothers? Yeah, there are some brothers. You got Peter and Andrew. You got James and John. But this dude over here, he is no one's friend. He's not even part of that clique that was the friends of John the Baptist. He's nobody. He's a guy named Matthew, a guy named Levi, who was a tax collector who nobody wanted in the group, who eventually comes in the group, and after 3 years of watching that nonsense, he's now a believer, and he writes one of the earliest Gospels. He doesn't flinch. This is way too easy to break. So if you're asking me, is this a conspiracy? Yeah, it's possible. But man, if it was, why didn't anyone ever change their story? So I just said, okay, it's possible, but it's not reasonable. Hey, maybe they just imagined this. They envisioned it, right? They wanted it so badly. Like someone like Mary, for example, she's by herself. She sees Jesus. She wants him to be alive. If she thinks it's a gardener, oh no, it's Jesus. No, Mary, it's a gardener. You think it's Jesus because you want it, and you're by yourself. You're one person. Anyone can imagine something. This is probably also true, I would say, back in those days. Peter felt bad that he had denied Jesus. You don't think he wanted him to be alive? He's by himself. He sees what he thinks is Jesus. No, it's not Jesus. You're just imagining this. And James probably felt the same way. We have a single sighting of James that's described in 1 Corinthians. But then it gets weird. What happens then when you have more than one? This guy Paul, for example, bothers me. Okay, so Paul is on the road with 3. Now, he's the only one who sees Jesus. But do you think he wants Jesus to be alive so much that he imagines him to be alive? And then what do you do with more multiple attestations? Like here, for example, on the road to Emmaus, there's at least 2. Are they having a group dream? We don't have group dreams, okay? If you know what my dream was last night, that's going to freak me out, okay? We don't have group dreams. They're having a group dream here? You have lots of these. You have 3, the 3 women. Really? Is that a group dream? There's a scene here with 7. I couldn't even get them all on the same screen. I tried. I'll give you, there's 5 there I can show you at least, okay? There's 2 more over there, okay? Just so you know. Then you have the 12 minus Judas, minus Thomas in the upper room. We got 10. 10 people who saw the risen Christ. Then you've got several accounts in which the disciples with Thomas are back united, and they see. Are they having group dreams here? What's the deal with this? And then you have lots where we're not even sure how many there are. There are at least 12. At least 11. There could be more, because it just says the disciples are on the mountain. We don't know what that means. Does it mean just the 11? Does it mean all of the people who he has been teaching? We're not quite sure. This is my favorite scene of all. This is when Jesus ascends into heaven. I want you to think about that for a second. Forget about the resurrection for a second. If the resurrection never happened, but you have this guy named Jesus who at some point in front of a bunch of people ascended into heaven, I think that would do it for me, okay? How about you? For some of you who are skeptical, who are in this room right now, I just guarantee you this. If Jesus was here right now and in front of you he ascended into heaven, you would be a believer today, okay? I'm going to make that happen for you right now. Are you ready? Are you ready to see this and become a Christian? Because here it comes. Just get ready right now. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Whoop, there he goes. All right. There should be no unbelievers in the room, right? Look, in the end, there's a bunch of people here. Paul tells us then that here are 500 at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep, he says. That means when I'm writing to you in Corinth, most of these people I'm telling you about, most of whom remain until now, although some have fallen asleep, most of these people were still available to interview. Really? That's a pretty bold statement if it ain't true. And I can try to count them for you here. You ready? Here we go. That's a lot of people. I'm just telling you right now. I couldn't even get them all, so I'll add over here, there, good to go. All right? That's a lot of people. By the way, if you don't think it's true, just go back to the tomb, because if you've imagined this, there'll be a body in the tomb, right? But the tomb is empty. Well, if the tomb is empty, then you stole the tomb? This is a conspiracy theory now? We're back to conspiracy theory? Where does this go? We have an empty tomb. And that's why Peter says, hey, we're not making this stuff up, guys. We are just telling you what we saw. So I think in the end, I'm like, okay, it's possible. I just don't think it's reasonable. Now I'm going to skip through the next few and go right down to the Christian explanation. Here, by the way, I did get a late start. I get a few extra minutes. She's already giving me that stink eye, like my time is running out, okay? So, all right. I want to go right down to the Christian explanation. Now, by the way, I've looked at every explanation for my cases. Even when I do a case in front of a jury, I know that my case proper has weaknesses. The defense's case has weaknesses, but my case has strengths, and I think the strengths outweigh the weaknesses. His case has weaknesses that I think outweigh the strengths. And I'm asking a jury to look at all these cases, because even the truth will have some weaknesses in your case. Some questions I just can't answer because I don't have any evidence for that, okay? So don't think for a second, if you can't come to a verdict, if you have an unanswered question, are you kidding me? That's what juries do every day in America. They come to a verdict with unanswered questions. If you think you can't render a verdict on Jesus of Nazareth because you have some unanswered questions, take your hand like this and slap yourself in the side of the head, because that's just stupid. You don't have every question answered on anything. You don't even know how your car works. Don't you turn that ignition tomorrow. It could blow up in your face. But you do it anyway. You know enough to turn the key. So I want to go to this last one. This is the Christian explanation. The Christian explanation basically is just that, hey, these are accurate records of something that actually happened. Now, I would have said to you that this has got a weakness that I cannot overcome. I would have granted that it does have a strength. The strength is that it will explain those 4 things better than any other explanation. But the weakness is that it requires me to believe in something supernatural, and I wasn't going there, because I was a very committed philosophical naturalist. I don't believe in miracles. So if you want me to believe that a miracle is the most reasonable explanation for the evidence, I'm out. But isn't that what the whole question is? Isn't the whole question of this investigation whether or not miracles, like the resurrection, could ever be the most reasonable explanation? That's the thing we're investigating. You can't say, well, I don't believe in miracles. No, stupid. That's the thing we're investigating. So just shut up and just leave it, just take your doubt and suspend it for a second so we can do the investigation. Because I guarantee you, if you're not willing to suspend your doubt, then I can show you some piece of evidence. You will find a way to jump over this. And I can say, well, yeah, but I've got great support on early versions of the scriptures. I've got archaeological support. You will find some way to jump over everything I argue with you. And every piece of evidence I give you, you will just say, no, I don't believe in miracles. No, can't tell you, no, I don't care. I don't believe in miracles. And you will end up at the very end saying, no, it's not reasonable. The resurrection is not reasonable because it's supernatural. Why are you stuck there? Because that's where you started and you refuse to move. You are engaged in circular reasoning. There's a reason why I showed you this nightstand. I showed you that nightstand because that is what happened to those officers. They thought they knew the answer before they got there. So much so that they didn't even pull down the blanket and they missed the most reasonable inference because they thought they knew the answer. So when it comes to Jesus and the resurrection, there's only got two choices, and here they are. Either he rose from the dead or he didn't. Now, I would have said, if you want me to believe this, that means I have to accept all possible explanations, including supernatural ones. No, sorry, can't do that. I have a roadblock in my way. I don't believe in the supernatural. But as I examined all of the naturalistic explanations, I found that none of them work. They are all roadblocks. I didn't care. I would jump over them, or I would drip around them, or I would go under them, because I wanted to get over here. Now just take a look at this picture for a second. Which of these two paths is least encumbered? And by the way, if you look at these two paths, there's only one roadblock on this side. And I put it there. This does not need to be here. This is because I'm stubborn and I will not lay it down. Nope, that's the... Jim, but this is what we're investigating. You can't assume the end before you start investigating. You need to lay that down until you see. If I would have just have laid it down, I could have seen clearly that this is by far the best explanation from evidence. So at some point I realized that the only thing standing between me and the truth of Christianity was me. That's true for a lot of you too. Now, I will tell you that even though I'm sharing this with you, there are still some people here who will say, I don't care how good the evidence is for this. Here's the problem I have. I know the way the world really is. And the world is crummy. And if you want me to believe there's an all-powerful, all-loving God, why doesn't he step in and stop this nonsense now? I've experienced enough in my own life, some of you would say, that demonstrate for me there could not be a God. That was largely what this family told my dad years ago. This is my dad here, back in 1970, 74 actually. Pathetic polyester suit, pathetic tie right there. He always hates this picture, says his butt looks big in this picture. But that's actually his gun under his jacket, you just can't tell. But I always tell him, yeah, you had a big butt in those days, man. That's terrible. Now, they're walking this guy across the street for killing a girl who was 10 years old. It turns out he isn't our killer, but we thought he was for about a year and a half. This was still an open case until last year when we solved it using ancestry DNA. So, by the way, I want to thank all of you who are searching for your ancestors, because it's making it possible for us to arrest your family members, because that's how we found this guy. But the question is, how could this happen to the little 10-year-old girl named Jackie? How could there be a loving God if this kind of stuff is still going on? That's the question we all have. How could it be true? Well, it turns out, like any case, there's a number of factors. Jackie was the kind of person who had the personality who would get into a car with a stranger. If she's not a girl who gets into a car with a stranger, this doesn't happen to her on that day. This also happened on a holiday when her parents said, get outside, don't come back inside for the next 2 hours, we're making dinner. If this was not a holiday and she's not the kind of girl who gets into a stranger's car, she's alive today. Also, this happens to be, probably, I've worked these kinds of pedophiles before, the person who did this to her had probably a pretty disturbing upbringing of his own. If there's not a guy with a disturbing upbringing of his own and she isn't the kind of kid who gets into a car on a holiday, she's alive today. Also, the neighborhood in which this occurred was very niche-y. A very unusual pocket of our city. He'd have to know how to get in and out of this pocket. If he isn't the kind of person who knows that neighborhood well enough to get in and out, doesn't have that disturbing upbringing, it's not a holiday, and she doesn't get in his car, she doesn't die. Also, he had the right kind of car to commit this kind of crime. If he has a Toyota Celica, this doesn't happen. Finally, he had an opportunity. We didn't discover the body till the next day. He had an opportunity to do this. Now, this is why this happened to Jackie. And these factors all are connected. I, as a detective, have to figure out how they're connected. But it's all 5 of these that together explain what happened to Jackie. Now, there's evil in the world. I get it. But I think there are 7 things. I'm not going to talk about them all today. I'm just going to give you a couple of them because we're running out of time, that explain why this occurs. Why would God ever allow something like that to happen? Well, it turns out it's this case. It's cumulative. Like every explanation of evil, it's not just one answer. So I want to give you some things to think about before I leave with you. First, do you have an accurate view of eternity? Eternity changes everything. I used to think of life as a line segment, like 90 years. I was an atheist. I said, okay, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for 90 pain-free, productive years. No pain. I want to die in my sleep at the age of 90. Aren't we all hoping for that? Right? Once we're all done. Now, if I'd have had, say, got sick at the age of 40 with cancer and suffered for 5 years and then died, I'd have been ticked off. Why? Because my expectation is 90. And now you're cutting it short of 90. That's evil. That makes sense? It's my expectation. Evil is always measured in the context of your expectation. And I expected 90. That would have been lost. But what if I'm wrong about what is life? What if life is not a segment, but it's a ray that starts at a point and moves to the thing we call death and continues off in this direction forever? Now think about it. There are people in this room who had a surgery while they were infants. You had some deformity that needed to be corrected. So they put your little infant body up on the surgery table. They cut you open. They fixed whatever it was, and for a month, 2 months, 3 months, you were in pain recovering from a surgery as an infant. Now, by the time you were like 3, I could ask you about it, and you're going to go, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I'm sure it happened if my mom says it happened, but I don't remember it because I'm 3 now. Do you see what's happening here? Now, check it out. If our view as Christians is true, eternity, as it goes off in that direction, is now being measured against our temporal lives. So in other words, evil that you experienced was measured in the context of your life. But if our view is true, as eternity extends in that direction, your temporal life by comparison is smaller and smaller and smaller until it's a millisecond compared to the rest of your life. Now, I don't care if you suffered 90 years of bad stuff and you had a miserable life for 90 years, you never had any relief. That now has to be measured in terms of eternity. Yeah, evil's a problem for atheists. It should be. But if it's a problem for you as a believer, it's because you're thinking of your life like an atheist. Change your view. Eternity changes everything. Also remember that you have to have something. We say God is love. Why would a loving God allow this? Well, what do you mean by love? What is your definition of love and free agency? It turns out that you have to have something dangerous in place in order for you to love anybody. Did you ever think about that? Which is better? Is it better? Would a loving God do which of these two things? Would a loving God create a world in which love is not possible, or a world in which love is possible? Which of these two? A world in which I can experience love, or a world in which you're never going to experience love? I think a loving God creates a world in which we can experience love. Are you sure you want that world? I want you to think about that. Imagine I sent this card to my wife because I broke up with her, and I sent her a card on Valentine's Day. Wrote, "You will love me. Roses are red. Bullets are lead. Take me back now or get shot in the head." How effective is that card going to be in bringing my wife back to me? I don't think it's going to work. Why? Because you cannot coerce love. Love has to be freely given. That means if you want a world in which love is even possible, you have to have something scary in place first. Free agency. And free agency means you have to give me the freedom to hate you. Now, I may choose to love you, and if I do, that love will be genuine. But to think you could have a world in which love is possible without the freedom to hate, that's a logical contradiction. You cannot have that kind of world. It does not exist. That means that God is going to do something crazy and dangerous. But that is what has to be in place first. Now, an evil God would throw the knife at you and not tell you how to catch it by the handle or the blade. That's not what God does. He gives you this crazy, dangerous thing called free agency, and he gives you the rule book so you won't mishandle your free agency. Now, a lot of you will ignore the rule book, but that's not on God. A loving God gives you the ability and gives you the guidance, and then it's on you if you screw it up. Does that make sense? So what do we need? We need those two things for sure. And finally, I think I can just go one more with you, one or two more. What are you calling love to begin with? Look, I think we have a definition of love we get from culture, which is not true. We think of these things when we think of love. But if you're a parent in this room, you know there's a piece missing here, right? There's tough love, right? It's all the other stuff. You know, I've got a 23-year-old. When she first went to college, she wanted to be a technician, vet tech. So she goes to college, and then she decides to drop out of school. And I said, okay, I get it, no problem. But now it's on you. I can help you while you're going to school, but now you're 8 hours away, and if you want to live on your own, that's going to be on you. And it was hard because she would call me just to say, how's it going? Going good. My car needed to be fixed last week. What'd that cost you? Oh, it cost me $900. I want to send her the $900. I want to, but I don't. Because she has to know that there's no net unless you build that net for yourself. And if you're not willing to build that net, I can't continue to treat you like there's a net. I can't be your net. What's going to happen to you when I go? You're not my lifelong child, okay? I know some of you in this room right now are nudging your husband or your wife or your kids going, yeah, it's true, you too, okay? I get it. Your kids are probably like in their 20s, I'm guessing. Tough love is more important, I think. It's really important. Let's go back for a second to a quote from C.S. Lewis. He says it this way. He says, we want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven. You know, a senile benevolence who, as they say, like to see young people enjoying themselves and, you know, whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. Okay, that's what grandfathers do, okay? That's not what fathers do. I can't wait to be a grandfather, okay? I'm going to just spoil the dog snot out of my grandkids. I don't care, right? Because I'm going to go home with them. They're going to eat sugar. They're going to eat all that stuff. And then I'm going to teach them how to lie to their parents. The 5 rules. Right? I don't want to be laid out for giving them sweets. But that's what grandparents do. That's not what parents do. Okay, let's go back to our timeline for a second. Here it is. If you are, as a Christian, you know you have this temporal life and you have this eternal life. You might say this is your earthly life and this is your post-earthly life. Now, while you're here in your earthly life, you will have a set of earthly parents. Make sense? And these earthly parents, they are going to care for you and they're going to guide you and they're going to show you some love, right? And if something bad happens to you right here, you might ask, why did you let that bad thing happen to me? Well, because I'm your parent, and I knew that I was trying to achieve something good over here. So I let you go through that surgery so you could not have this problem over here. Make sense? Now, if what we believe is true, you also have an earthly and post-earthly parent called God. Now, you might argue, and I've had people ask me, well, look, I've known people who experience evil in their life, and it never got any better. Well, yeah, stupid. It's because he's not working with the same thing your parents are. He has eternity to work with. For all you know, he's trying to achieve something good over here. You're not going to see it. Not now. He's got a longer timeline to work with than your parents had. And by the way, I'll tell you this. Parents don't give a lick if they're good parents about your comfort. They care about your character. And love aims at that kind of thing. At something that's lasting, that has eternal benefits. I'm not even sure if I have this next one queued up. It's up on the top of the stage there. I don't. Now, here's what I wanted to show you. In any act of evil, and I'll send this to you. I'll send the whole video to you so you'll have all 7, okay? You're going to get it. But for now, because we're running short on time, I want you to see that sometimes in an act of evil, I have to figure out what is the percentage, what is the relative weight of one cause related to another. Does that make sense? They're not all equal when weighed against the event. They are all of different levels. Then I got to figure out what is the relationship between each cause. And then finally, I have to figure out why did that happen the way it did. This is how we put together every criminal case. This is how you have to start thinking about why evil occurs in your own life. I'll tell you this, though. God has 7 good reasons to let you suffer something if what we believe about eternity is true. So stop acting like you're an atheist. That makes sense? By the way, why are you calling this evil to begin with? Because you don't like it? You don't like what happened to her? The guy who did it to her, he didn't mind it. He actually liked it. He probably did 5 or 6 more the same year. He's a serial killer. He has no problem with it. You don't like it, so you're calling it evil? Or do you think it really is evil? I mean, evil, it transcends everybody. This is true evil. Really? If it's true evil, where do we get that from? Lewis put it this way. My argument against God when he was an atheist was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I gotten that idea of just and unjust? I mean, think about it. A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe with when I was calling it unjust? In other words, if there isn't a transcendent standard of righteousness that's not just a matter of opinion, it transcends all of us, then there cannot be any transcendent absence of righteous called evil. All you can have is just stuff you like or don't like compared to what others like or don't like. Do you see the problem? We believe there's true evil because there is true evil. This is why I'm going to end where I started. I am not a Christian today because it works for me, because I'll be honest with you, it doesn't work for me. It doesn't. How many of you would say it actually works for you? This is one of the hardest worldviews to embrace right now in America, and it's going to get more difficult because every moral claim about sex, family, marriage, sexuality, gender, all of these things have been abandoned by the culture. Yet here you stand, I talked about this with the high school students, as Christ followers. Are you really want to be Christ followers? Let me tell you how easy it is to live without following Jesus. I did it for 35 years. It's so easy to throw the dart against the wall and just go draw the bullseye wherever the dart lands. Okay, that's easy. I did that for 35 years. Now the problem is there's a bullseye sitting there and I can never hit it. You can't either. This is a harder life. If you ask Susie, which half of our life together, the 18 before we became Christians or the 22 since, trust me, she will tell you the 18 was easier. This is harder. It's not going to feel like it works for you. There's going to be times when you're going to go, man, I'm selfish. I want something other than this. I get that. But it is true. And I would much rather be in an inconvenient truth than in a convenient lie. Now that's where you are. I just want to leave you with one last thing. I come to these conferences, marriage conferences, because they matter to me. Because before I had God as God, I had something else as God. Marriage was my God. Because my parents did not stay married. My parents divorced when I was 3. My mom did not remarry. It was just me and her growing up. I hated it. It was terrible, okay? And we were like dirt poor in Los Angeles County, and it felt like we were the fifth wheel on everything. Back in 1962, 63, there weren't a lot of divorced people raising their kids. Believe it or not. And I'm telling you, I hated it. And when I met Susie, I said to her, I'll be honest with you, I love marriage more than I love you. I just do. But I want a crazy good marriage, and that means I'm going to have to love you crazy good in order to have that marriage out. In other words, marriage was the thing I loved, and as I chased it, I could only be drawn closer to Susie. Now, I will tell you, if God exists and you will simply chase God, you know what happens. The closer you get to God, that isosceles triangle, the closer you come to each other. You just have to chase God together and chase the value of this thing that we call marriage. That it started in my state when Ronald Reagan, believe it or not, Ronald Reagan was the one who legitimized no-fault divorce. We were the first state to embrace it. That's right. He regretted it for the rest of his career. I will tell you that we have to hold this thing. There's love God, love marriage, love your spouse. Get marriage where it needs to be. Let me pray for you before I let you go. Father, we love you, and we know that you can do amazing things with us once we are committed to truth, and we know that something is true. Would you just help us to have a new way of looking at our faith, not as something we embrace blindly, but as something we know is the most reasonable inference from evidence, even though we don't have all the answers. We're going to step across those answers as an act of faith. But it doesn't come blindly. It's at the end of a very robust evidence trail. Thank you, Father, for giving us the evidence. We pray this in the name of your precious Son, Jesus Christ. And everyone here says, Amen. Thanks, guys.